Keep your hands up. Don't lower them. Not even a little. You move when I tell you to move.
My hands are up. I'm not resisting. I'm just asking what this is about.
You'll get answers when I say you get answers. Right now, you stand still and follow instructions. Do you understand me?
Yes, I understand.
At 6:14 a.m. on a quiet suburban street in Falls Church, Virginia, 3 unmarked black SUVs rolled to a stop and blocked the driveway of a brick colonial home. 6 ICE agents in full tactical gear stepped out and moved toward the front door in formation. Within 90 seconds, they had dragged a black man in pajamas face down onto his own front lawn, zip-tied his wrists behind his back, and pinned him to the wet grass, while neighbors watched from porches, still holding their morning coffee. The man was Colonel Nathaniel Drayton, a sitting military judge in the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals, one of the highest-ranking judicial officers in the entire military justice system. His wife stood in the doorway screaming. His 2 daughters, 11 and 14, clung to her sides, sobbing. No warrant was presented, no crime was named, no identification was requested before force was used. Across the street, a retired FBI supervisory special agent was already on the phone, dialing a number in Washington before Drayton's knees had even touched the ground. Senior Agent Victor Peretti was 44 years old and had spent 16 years with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, assigned to enforcement and removal operations. Inside the agency, he was known as a closer, someone who hit his deportation quotas and didn't ask too many questions about how he got there. He had a reputation for running operations in affluent neighborhoods, targeting people of color he seemed to decide didn't belong in the houses they owned. 7 formal complaints of racial profiling had been filed against him over the past decade. Every single one had been reviewed internally and dismissed. His partner that morning was Agent Bryce Nolan, 31, 5 years on the job, a man who had never once questioned Peretti's judgment or challenged a single call he made. He followed orders, stayed quiet, and kept his head down. The third key figure in the operation was Agent Kevin Scholl, 36, who had handled the surveillance and database work that led the team to the Drayton home. Scholl had pulled an address from an outdated system, matched it to a name flagged for removal, and never once cross-referenced with current records. He got the wrong house entirely. And Peretti, who should have verified every detail before authorizing a pre-dawn operation, never checked. He saw the neighborhood, he saw the name, he made his assumptions, and he sent 6 armed agents to the front door of a man who had served his country for 23 years. Colonel Nathaniel Drayton was 47 years old. He had graduated from West Point at 22, commissioned as a second lieutenant, and entered the Judge Advocate General's Corps, where he spent the next 23 years climbing through the ranks of military law. He had served as a trial counsel in courts-martial involving senior officers. He had presided over war crimes tribunals. He had been appointed to the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals, one of the most powerful judicial bodies in the military justice system, where his rulings carried weight across every branch of the armed forces. His wife, Dr. Simone Drayton, was a board-certified cardiologist at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. Their daughters, Amara, 14, and Nadia, 11, attended a private academy in Arlington and were both honor roll students. The family had lived in the same brick colonial in Falls Church for 9 years. They were active in their church. They knew their neighbors by name. Drayton held a top-secret security clearance, which meant his background had been investigated more thoroughly than most people could imagine. Financial records, travel history, family connections, foreign contacts, all of it scrutinized and cleared at the highest level. He was, by every measurable standard, one of the most vetted human beings in the United States. And none of that mattered at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning when 6 agents decided he didn't look like he belonged in his own home. The operation was flawed before a single SUV left the staging area. ICE had been searching for an undocumented individual flagged for removal, a man named Arturo Belmont who had lived at the Falls Church address 2 owners and more than 6 years prior. Agent Kevin Scholl ran the database query using an outdated immigration enforcement system that had not been synced with current property records, county tax filings, utility accounts, or voter registration rolls. Every single one of those records clearly showed the home belonged to the Drayton family. Scholl never checked. He pulled the address, matched it to the flag, and handed it to Peretti as confirmed. Peretti didn't verify either. He looked at the neighborhood, looked at the name attached to the file, and made a judgment that had nothing to do with evidence. In his mind, the person living at that address didn't match the zip code. He greenlit the pre-dawn raid without hesitation. No judicial warrant was obtained. Peretti told his team they would rely on administrative authority, a legal gray area that allowed ICE agents to conduct certain enforcement actions without a judge's signature. It was a loophole Peretti had exploited dozens of times before, always in neighborhoods where the people he targeted were unlikely to know their rights or have the resources to fight back. This time, he had chosen the wrong house, the wrong street, and the wrong man. The agents arrived at 6:10 a.m. 3 black SUVs with no markings pulled onto the street in a staggered formation, blocking the driveway and part of the sidewalk. Peretti was first out of the lead vehicle. He crossed the lawn in 4 quick strides and pounded on the front door with the side of his fist. The sound echoed down the quiet street. Dr. Simone Drayton opened the door in a bathrobe, still half asleep. Before she could speak, Peretti and 2 agents pushed past her into the foyer without clearly identifying themselves or stating their purpose. She stumbled backward into the hallway wall. "Federal agents," Peretti said over his shoulder, already moving toward the staircase. Drayton appeared at the top of the stairs moments later. He was calm. He walked down slowly with his hands visible. "I'm Colonel Nathaniel Drayton, United States Army. What is this about?" "Shut up and get on the ground," Peretti said. Drayton didn't move. "I'm asking you to identify yourselves and present a warrant." Peretti stepped closer. "We don't need one for people like you. Get down. Now." 2 agents grabbed Drayton by the arms and dragged him toward the front door. He did not resist. His bare feet scraped across the hardwood, then the concrete steps, then the cold, wet grass of his own front yard. They forced him face down onto the lawn and zip-tied his wrists behind his back. His pajama shirt rode up, his face pressed into the mud. His 11-year-old daughter Nadia ran out the front door, screaming for her father. Agent Bryce Nolan stepped into her path and shoved her backward toward the doorway with both hands. The child hit the doorframe and crumpled. Dr. Simone caught her and screamed, "He's a federal judge! He's a military judge! What are you doing?" Peretti glanced back and laughed. "Sure he is." By now, lights had come on in houses up and down the street. Figures stood on porches. At least 4 phones were recording. Ring doorbell cameras on 3 neighboring homes captured the full scene in high definition with clear audio. Every word, every shove, every second of it preserved. Directly across the street, standing motionless on his front porch, was Leonard Osei. He was 63 years old and had spent 28 years as a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation before retiring 4 years earlier. He had overseen federal task forces, led civil rights investigations, and testified before congressional committees on law enforcement oversight. He knew exactly what he was watching. And he knew immediately that every part of it was wrong. No warrant was served. No identification was presented at the door. The agents entered the home without consent. Force was used on a compliant individual. A child was physically pushed by an armed federal agent. Osei reached for his phone and began recording. But unlike the other neighbors, he didn't just point the camera, he narrated. He spoke in the steady, measured voice of a man who had documented scenes like this for 3 decades. He stated the time, the number of agents, the vehicles, the lack of paperwork, the level of force. He described Drayton's compliance and the agent's escalation. He captured Peretti's words clearly. "We don't need one for people like you." He recorded Nolan shoving the child, and while the camera was still rolling, he made a call with his other hand to a sitting contact at the Department of Justice. He didn't leave a voicemail. The call was answered on the second ring. Osei spoke 7 words. "You need to see what's happening here." That call, placed before Drayton had even been lifted off his own lawn, would set in motion a chain of events that no amount of internal maneuvering could stop. Drayton was transported to the local ICE field office in the back of one of the unmarked SUVs. He was still in his pajamas, still barefoot. His wrists were still zip-tied. He was placed in a holding cell with a concrete bench and a steel door, and left there without explanation. He sat upright, back straight, and waited. When an agent passed the cell, Drayton spoke clearly through the slot. "My name is Colonel Nathaniel Drayton. I am a sitting judge on the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals. I am requesting a phone call." The agent glanced at him and kept walking. Drayton repeated the request twice more over the next 40 minutes. Each time, he was ignored. When Peretti finally passed the cell, Drayton said it again. "I am a military appellate judge. I have a right to contact my command and my attorney." Peretti didn't stop. "Everyone claims to be someone important," he said without looking back. For 73 minutes, Drayton sat in that cell. No call, no water, no acknowledgement of who he was. Then, a supervisor named Rita Espinoza, responding to a flag in the intake system, ran Drayton's full name and date of birth through the federal database. The results came back instantly and filled the screen. Department of Defense, Joint Personnel Adjudication System, U.S. Army Judiciary, Top Secret Clearance, active, Judicial Appointment, confirmed. The room around her went dead silent. Espinoza stood up from her desk, walked down the hallway, and found Peretti near the break room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You just arrested a sitting military appellate judge. Top secret clearance. In his own home. Without a warrant. On camera." Peretti stared at her. The color left his face slowly, like something draining from behind his eyes. Espinoza continued. "His neighbor is retired FBI. His wife is a cardiologist at Walter Reed. And his name is already in the DOJ system because someone called it in an hour ago." Peretti said nothing. He leaned against the wall and looked at the floor. And for the first time in 16 years with the agency, he had absolutely nothing to say. The identification was confirmed at 7:47 a.m. By 8:15, the first calls were already moving through Washington. The Army Judge Advocate General's office was notified by a duty officer who had received a flag from the DOJ liaison. The message was brief. A sitting military appellate judge had been detained by ICE agents in a pre-dawn operation at his personal residence. No warrant had been issued. Force had been used. The judge's minor child had been physically handled by an agent. The Pentagon's Office of General Counsel opened a case file within minutes. A preliminary designation was assigned, and the file was flagged for immediate senior review. At the Department of Homeland Security, the Office of Inspector General received a formal referral before 9 a.m., triggered not only by the DOJ contact, but by internal flags raised when Drayton's identity was confirmed in the system. A congressional staffer on the Senate Armed Services Committee saw a neighbor's video circulating in a private group chat and recognized the street. She forwarded it to the committee's chief counsel with a single line. "This is Falls Church. That man is in uniform pajamas being zip-tied on his own lawn." By 9 a.m., the Secretary of the Army's office had been briefed. By 9:30, a legal team at the Pentagon had requested all operational documents related to the raid. By 10 a.m., the incident was moving through Department of Defense legal channels at a speed normally reserved for combat zone emergencies or the death of senior personnel. Phone lines between DHS, DOJ, and the Pentagon carried the kind of controlled urgency that meant someone very high up had already decided this would not be buried. Peretti was still leaning against the wall in the field office hallway when a second supervisor approached him. "You need to come with me. Your credentials are being collected. Don't talk to anyone." Peretti followed without a word. The hallway felt longer than it ever had before. Before the first federal investigator had even arrived at the field office, the cover-up was already underway. Peretti sat at a desk in a back room and opened his operational report. The original draft, written during the drive back from Falls Church, had been brief and procedural. He deleted key lines and began rewriting. The subject became combative upon contact. He refused to identify himself and physically resisted agents' attempts to secure the scene. Every word of it was a lie. In the next room, Agent Bryce Nolan had already submitted his own report, written in the SUV immediately after the arrest, before anyone at the field office had confirmed who Drayton was. Nolan's original version told a very different story. Subject was calm and cooperative throughout the encounter. He identified himself verbally and did not resist at any point. Nolan hadn't yet realized that his honesty would become the single most damaging internal document in the case. When he learned what Peretti had written, he said nothing. He didn't amend his own report. He didn't flag the contradiction. He simply stayed quiet. The same instinct that had guided his entire career. Meanwhile, Agent Kevin Shull had a different problem. He knew the address was wrong. He knew his database query had pulled outdated records. And he knew that if anyone looked at the search logs, they would see exactly where the failure started. So he logged into the system and attempted to alter the query history, backdating a cross-reference he had never actually performed. All 3 actions were flagged within hours. The DHS Office of Inspector General had already obtained unedited server data, mirrored copies of every report draft, and time-stamped access logs showing exactly who changed what and when. What had begun as a wrongful arrest built on negligence and bias was now something far worse. Federal obstruction, falsification of government records, a coordinated attempt to rewrite the truth after the truth had already been preserved, on camera, on servers, and in the hands of people who knew exactly what they were looking at. The evidence against the agents was not thin or circumstantial. It was overwhelming, layered, and captured from nearly every possible angle. 3 Ring doorbell cameras on neighboring homes had recorded the full raid from the moment the SUVs appeared on the street to the moment Drayton was dragged across his lawn in zip ties. The footage was high definition with clear audio. Every command, every shove, every word Peretti spoke was preserved. Leonard Osei's phone recording added a 4th angle from directly across the street, narrated in real time by a retired FBI supervisory special agent who described what he was witnessing with the precision of a federal evidentiary deposition. 4 additional neighbors had recorded portions of the arrest on their cell phones, capturing the moment Nolan shoved 11-year-old Nadia into the doorframe, and the moment Dr. Simone Drayton screamed that her husband was a military judge. The ICE field office intake log showed that Drayton had been held for 73 minutes without access to a phone call, despite repeated requests. Nolan's original unedited report confirmed Drayton had been calm and cooperative, directly contradicting Peretti's revised version. Server logs pulled by the Inspector General's digital forensics team showed the exact timestamps of Peretti's edits and Shull's attempted alteration of the database query, both made after Drayton's identity was confirmed. Radio communications between the agents during the approach to the house contained a transmission from Peretti that would become one of the most damaging pieces of audio in the entire case. This guy doesn't fit the neighborhood. Let's see what we've got. And then there was Dr. Simone Drayton's 911 call, placed at 6:16 a.m., 2 minutes after the agent's forced entry. Her voice was shaking, barely controlled. "Armed men without badges are dragging my husband out of our home. Please send help. He's a federal judge. Please." The dispatcher logged the call. The recording was preserved. Every piece of it, every frame, every timestamp, every word pointed in one direction. And there was nothing left for anyone to hide behind. The federal investigation moved with a speed and intensity that made clear from the outset this was not going to be handled quietly. The DHS Office of Inspector General and the DOJ Civil Rights Division launched parallel investigations within 48 hours of the incident. Teams were dispatched to Falls Church. Every neighbor on the street was interviewed. Every Ring doorbell camera feed was collected and cataloged. Every cell phone video was obtained with signed consent and chain of custody documentation. Subpoenas went out to the ICE field office for all operational records, internal communications, database access logs, radio transmissions, and personnel files related to the 6 agents involved. Each of the 6 agents was deposed individually in closed sessions. Peretti went first. He held to his revised version of events. The subject was uncooperative. He refused to identify himself. Force was necessary to control the scene. But when the three junior agents were deposed separately, the story collapsed. Each one, speaking without Peretti in the room, confirmed the same facts. No warrant was obtained or presented. Drayton identified himself immediately and did not resist. The 11-year-old girl was physically shoved into the doorframe by Agent Nolan. And Peretti had used racially coded language throughout the operation, not just on the radio, but in the vehicle on the way to the house and on the front lawn during the arrest. One junior agent quoted Peretti directly from the SUV. He said the name didn't match the neighborhood, said we'd probably find something once we got inside. Investigators then reopened Peretti's 7 prior complaints. What had once been dismissed as isolated misunderstandings now formed a clear and documented pattern. In each case, the target had been a person of color in an affluent area. In each case, Peretti had initiated contact based on assumptions rather than evidence. And in each case, the agency had closed the file without discipline. The pattern was no longer deniable. It was systemic. And the agency that had protected Peretti for over a decade was now fully exposed. The consequences came in waves over the following 3 months, and not one of them was quiet. Agent Victor Peretti was terminated first. The official notice cited gross misconduct, civil rights violations, falsification of federal documents, and obstruction of a federal investigation. His credentials were seized. His access to all federal systems was revoked. He was escorted from the building by 2 DHS investigators and referred directly to the United States Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. His 16-year career ended in a hallway with a cardboard box and a security escort. Agent Bryce Nolan was terminated the following week. The charges against him were failure to intervene during an unlawful arrest, participation in the use of excessive force, physical contact with a minor, and allowing his original report to be contradicted by a superior's falsified version without raising a flag. Nolan had never challenged Peretti, not once in 5 years, and that silence now carried a cost that matched the actions it had enabled. Agent Kevin Shull was terminated for negligence in target verification, failure to cross-reference current property records before a pre-dawn enforcement operation, and attempted tampering with federal database logs. His effort to cover his mistake after the fact had turned a career-ending error into a criminal referral. 2 supervisors who had approved the operation without reviewing Shull's address verification were formally demoted and reassigned to administrative roles with no field authority. Neither fought the decision. The most damaging consequence, however, reached higher than any of them. The field office director, a 22-year veteran of ICE, was forced into early retirement after internal emails surfaced during the investigation. In one message, sent 14 months before the Drayton raid, a subordinate had flagged concerns about Peretti's pattern of targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods. The director's response was 4 sentences long. The last one read, "He gets results. Leave him alone." That email was entered into the federal record. It would follow every name attached to it for the rest of their professional lives. The federal indictments came down 6 weeks after the terminations and landed with the weight of everything the evidence had made undeniable. A grand jury returned charges against Victor Peretti on 3 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, obstruction of justice, and falsification of federal records. Each charge carried significant prison time. The obstruction count alone, built on his rewritten operational report and the timestamp server logs proving exactly when he made the changes, was airtight. Kevin Shull was indicted separately on 2 counts: obstruction of a federal investigation and tampering with federal evidence. His attempt to backdate the database query had been captured in forensic detail by the Inspector General's digital team. There was no ambiguity. The logs showed what he did, when he did it, and that the original search had never included the cross-reference he tried to insert after the fact. Bryce Nolan, facing the same exposure, chose a different path. He cooperated fully with federal prosecutors, provided a detailed accounting of the operation from planning to execution, confirmed Peretti's language and decision-making throughout, and testified to the culture of silence that had allowed Peretti to operate unchecked for years. In exchange, Nolan received a single reduced charge and a recommendation for leniency at sentencing. The Drayton family filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in the Eastern District of Virginia. The defendants were ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, and the three agents personally. The complaint cited unlawful arrest without a warrant, excessive force against a compliant individual, assault on a minor child, racial profiling, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The government's attorneys reviewed the evidence, the ring camera footage, Osei's narrated recording, the 911 call, the intake logs, the radio transmission, the falsified reports. They settled before trial. The figure was reported in the multi-millions. As part of the settlement, DHS agreed to sweeping operational reforms, including mandatory judicial warrant verification for all residential enforcement actions, independent address confirmation protocols requiring at least 3 current record cross-references, and department-wide de-escalation training with annual recertification. The reforms were binding, the money was significant, but for the Drayton family, neither one erased what had happened on that lawn at 6:14 in the morning. Colonel Nathaniel Drayton returned to the bench 5 weeks after the raid. He resumed his caseload at the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals, without ceremony, without fanfare, and without public comment for nearly 2 months. When he finally spoke, it was in a brief written statement released through his attorney. The words were measured and precise, the way everything about him had always been. I have spent 23 years upholding the law in uniform. I have presided over cases that determined the futures of service members and the integrity of the military justice system. I never imagined I would need the law to protect me from my own government in my own driveway. The statement circulated widely. He did not do interviews. He did not appear on camera. He let the words stand on their own. Dr. Simone Drayton carried a different burden. 3 months after the raid, she was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee examining federal enforcement overreach in residential settings. She sat behind a microphone in a hearing room on Capitol Hill and described what the raid had done to her daughters. She told the committee that Nadia, who was 11, had not answered the front door of their home in 4 months, that she woke up screaming at least twice a week, that she flinched at the sound of car doors closing in the morning. She told them that Amara, who was 14, had stopped talking about what happened entirely and had begun withdrawing from friends and activities she once loved. Dr. Simone's voice broke only once when she said, "They were eating cereal when the door came open. They were in their pajamas. They watched their father dragged across the yard." The room was silent. 6 months later, the Drayton family established the Drayton Justice Initiative, a legal defense fund dedicated to providing representation for victims of warrantless federal enforcement actions. The fund partnered with civil rights organizations and law school clinics across 4 states. Colonel Drayton was later nominated for a federal judicial appointment. The nomination moved through committee without opposition. 6 months after the sentencing, a training bulletin was distributed to every DHS field office in the country. It was 4 pages long, printed on standard department letterhead, and marked mandatory reading for all enforcement personnel. On the first page was a single image. It was a still frame pulled from a Ring doorbell camera on a quiet suburban street in Falls Church, Virginia. It showed a black man in pajamas lying face down on his own front lawn. His wrists were bound behind his back with zip ties. His bare feet were visible against the wet grass. And in the doorway behind him, partially blocked by the arm of a federal agent, an 11-year-old girl reached toward her father with both hands. Her face frozen in a scream the image couldn't carry, but no one who saw it would fail to hear. Beneath the photograph, in plain black text, were the words, "This is what happens when protocol fails and bias fills the gap." No names were printed on the bulletin, no badge numbers, no office designations. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. The indictments were already public. The footage had already been seen by millions. And the precedent, written into federal settlement terms, binding policy reforms, and congressional testimony, was already set. Somewhere in a federal courtroom, a colonel in dress uniform sat behind the bench and called his next case. Somewhere in a congressional archive, a mother's testimony about her daughters sat preserved in the official record. And somewhere in a DHS field office, a new agent picked up the bulletin, looked at the image, and understood without being told that the rules had changed. Not because of politics, not because of pressure, because of a man in his own driveway who never raised his voice, never lifted a hand, and never stopped being exactly who he said he was. Now, watching footage like this, it can really stick with you, right? Some of these clips stay in your head, especially late at night when you're trying to fall asleep. And speaking of sleep, a lot of you have told me you're waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and just lying there. Can't shut your mind off. And the next day you're dragging through everything. I came across a simple 21-day sleep guide that's helped thousands of people fix exactly that. No pills, no apps, no gadgets, just a step-by-step plan that actually works. It's only $15. I put the link in the description if you want to check it out. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.